The chamber of the Galactic Concordat stretched 300 meters across, carved from a single massive crystal that pulsed with soft blue light from within, and around its circular perimeter sat representatives from 12 different civilizations that had maintained peace for over 2,000 years through strict weapons treaties and mutual understanding of technological limitations. Ambassador Chen Wei stood at the human podium, her dark suit a stark contrast to the flowing robes and exotic armatures worn by the alien delegates surrounding her. And she felt the familiar weight of dismissal pressing down on her shoulders as she prepared to speak once more on behalf of Earth and its scattered colonies. The human delegation requests equal representation in Concordat military decisions, Chan said, her voice steady despite knowing what response would come. And she watched as several delegates didn't even bother to activate their translation matrices, already turning to whisper among themselves. The Krolix representative, a towering being of chitinous plates and 6 articulated limbs named War Prime Thalix, rose from his seat with a sound like grinding stones, and his voice boomed through the chamber with barely concealed contempt. Humanity lacks the sophisticated weaponry required for military council participation, Thalix declared, his translator rendering his clicking speech into flat, dismissive tones. And around the chamber several other delegates gestured their agreement. Your industrial base remains charmingly archaic. Your energy weapons generations behind current standards, and your understanding of shield harmonics remains at elementary levels. Chun felt Commander Sarah Okonkwo tense beside her, the military liaison's jaw tightening at the casual insult. But Chun raised a subtle hand to forestall any response and tried a different approach. Our colony worlds produce significant resources that feed Concordat trade, Chun argued, pulling up holographic displays of human mining operations, agricultural outputs, and manufacturing centers. We deserve representation proportional to our economic contribution, the Vex delegate, a floating cluster of crystalline structures that communicated through harmonic resonances, chimed in with what the translator rendered as mild amusement. Economic participation does not equal military standing, the Vex sang, and the sound was almost beautiful despite the rejection it carried. The Concordat's weapons treaty maintains peace through balanced technological development, and humanity's kinetic-based industries represent outdated methodologies that cannot contribute to modern defense strategies. Chun had heard variations of this argument for 3 years now, ever since humanity had achieved faster-than-light travel and petitioned for Concordat membership, and they had been granted economic partnership, but remained excluded from any real political power or military protection. Commander Okonkwo leaned close and whispered, "They're never going to see us as equals," and Chun nodded slightly, because after 3 years of diplomatic attempts, she was beginning to believe the same thing. The session continued for another 2 hours, covering trade disputes, territorial boundaries, and technology sharing agreements. And throughout it all, the human delegation sat in their assigned seats while decisions affecting their colonies were made without their input. As the session drew to a close, War Prime Thalix requested the floor once more, and the massive Krolix moved to the center of the chamber with deliberate, heavy steps that made the crystal floor hum with resonance. The Krolix Empire hereby issues formal notification of territorial claim adjustment, Thalix announced, and Chun felt her stomach drop even before the holographic display appeared. 3 human colony worlds designated New Brisbane, Kepler Station, and Nova Ramofol within traditional Krolix expansion zones and must be surrendered within 14 standard days. The chamber erupted in murmurs and harmonics and clicking conversations. But no one objected. No voice rose in defense of human territory. And Chun understood with sudden cold clarity that this had been discussed and agreed upon before the session even began. Those worlds house over 2 million human civilians, Chun said, her voice cutting through the noise with sharp urgency. You cannot simply claim inhabited planets because you desire their resources. The Concordat recognizes historical expansion patterns, Thalix replied, and his translator couldn't quite mask the satisfaction in his voice. Humanity arrived in this region of space recently. While Kralek's territorial claims predate your species' first spaceflight by millennia, and without military standing in the Concordat, you lack the authority to dispute such claims. This is theft, Okonkwo said, stepping forward despite diplomatic protocol, her hand instinctively moving toward where a sidearm would rest if weapons were permitted in the chamber. You're threatening millions of people because you know we can't fight back. We are exercising legitimate territorial rights, Thalix corrected, turning his massive body to face Okonkwo directly. If humanity wishes to dispute this claim, you may do so through military challenge as specified in Concordat Charter. Though I suspect your primitive vessels would provide little sport. Chun gripped the edge of her podium hard enough that her knuckles went white, and she forced herself to breathe slowly and think clearly despite the rage and fear churning in her gut. We request Concordat arbitration, Chun said, invoking one of the few rights available to junior member species. This dispute should be resolved through diplomatic channels. The vexed delegate chimed again, this time with what sounded almost like pity. Arbitration requires military equivalence between parties, the crystalline being sang, and the translation carried an edge of finality. Humanity lacks the technological development to qualify for such proceedings, and the Concordat cannot intervene in territorial disputes between species of vastly different military capabilities. Chun looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes and optical sensors and awareness fields of representatives from civilizations that had traded with Earth, that had benefited from human labor and resources and innovation. And she saw only indifference and mild discomfort, like witnesses to an unfortunate but inevitable conclusion. The Tuven is the Judician, an unfortunate to an unfortunate but inevitable conclusion. The session ended with formal recording of the Kralek's claim and humanity's objection. Meaningless words that would sit in archives while 2 million people faced displacement or worse. And as the delegates filed out in their various modes of locomotion, Chun and Okonkwo stood alone at their podium. 14 days, Okonkwo said quietly, and her voice carried the weight of impossible calculations. We can't evacuate 2 million people in 14 days. And even if we could, where would they go? Earth's Defense Council is meeting in 6 hours, Chun replied, checking her chrono and feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down like a physical force. We need to be on the next transport back to Sol System. As they walked through the crystal corridors toward the docking bays, passing aliens who barely glanced at them, Okonkwo asked the question that had been hanging unspoken between them. Can we fight them? Chun wanted to lie, wanted to offer hope or confidence or some inspiring diplomatic solution. But she respected Okonkwo too much for comfortable falsehoods. Their fleet could glass every human world in a week, Chun said, and the words tasted like ash. Our plasma weapons are 3 generations behind theirs. Our shields can barely stop their lightest attacks. And our ships are slower and less maneuverable than anything they field. So we surrender, Okonkwo said. And it wasn't quite a question, we survive, Chun corrected, though she wasn't sure there was a meaningful difference. We give them the 3 worlds, evacuate who we can, and we survive long enough to become strong enough that they can't do this again. The transport to Sol System would take 9 days at maximum FTL, leaving 5 days for Earth's government to make a decision that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. And as their ship pulled away from the Concordat station, Chun watched the massive structure dwindle against the stars, and wondered if humanity would ever truly have a place among these ancient, powerful civilizations, or if they were destined to remain forever as the primitive newcomers, tolerated when convenient and discarded when inconvenient. Their people and worlds nothing more than resources to be claimed when the old powers desired them. Mars Station, Archimedes hung in orbit above the red planet like a massive steel flower. Its rotating habitation rings housing Earth's united defense, council, and the brightest military minds humanity could assemble on short notice. And in the central conference chamber, those minds were reaching a grim consensus that Commander Sarah Okonkwo desperately wanted to argue against but couldn't. Admiral Marcus Rodriguez stood at the head of the table, his weathered face illuminated by tactical displays showing the Krolyk's fleet composition, known weapons capabilities, and projected engagement scenarios. And every single simulation ended with human forces destroyed or scattered within the first hour of combat. "We can't win a conventional engagement," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a man who had run the numbers 1,000 times, hoping for different results. Their plasma cannons outrange ours by 40%. Their shields can absorb 3 times the punishment ours can deliver. And their point defense systems will shred any missile barrage we launch. "So we evacuate," said Councillor Park, a thin woman with iron-gray hair who represented the colonial authority. 2 million people in 5 days. It's impossible. But we have to try. We don't have the transport capacity, Okonkwo interjected, pulling up logistics data that she had been reviewing during the 9-day journey from Concordat space. Every civilian transport we own, working around the clock, could move maybe 800,000 people before the deadline. And that's assuming the Krolyks don't fire on evacuation ships. The chamber fell silent, except for the hum of air recyclers and the distant thrum of the station's rotation. And Okonkwo saw the same calculation playing out on every face around the table. The terrible mathematics of choosing who lives and who gets left behind. "There has to be another option," said General Zhang, his fist coming down on the table with enough force to make the holographic displays flicker. "We cannot simply abandon 1 million people to Krolyk's occupation. The alternative is fighting a war we cannot win and losing everything," Rodriguez replied, and his voice carried the bitter weight of military realism. "If we engage their fleet and lose, and we will lose, they won't stop at 3 colonies. They'll take it all as punishment for resistance." Okonkwo had been in enough war rooms to recognize the moment when defeat becomes accepted. When leaders start speaking in terms of damage mitigation instead of victory. And she felt something cold and angry hardening in her chest because humanity had come so far only to be stopped by species that dismissed them as primitive and irrelevant. The chamber door opened, and a young lieutenant stepped in, clearly uncomfortable at interrupting such a high-level meeting. And he moved quickly to whisper something to Admiral Rodriguez. "There's a civilian researcher requesting access to the council," Rodriguez announced, frowning at whatever message the lieutenant had delivered. "A Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Mars Kinetic Research Institute claims she has relevant information for our tactical situation. We don't have time for academic theories," Councillor Park said. But Zhang raised a hand. "The Kinetic Research Institute does experimental work on obsolete weapon systems," Zhang said. And Okonkwo heard something in his voice that suggested he was grasping at straws, but willing to grasp anyway. What could it hurt to listen? Yuki Tanaka entered the chamber 5 minutes later, carrying a data tablet and wearing a lab coat over casual clothes that suggested she had come directly from her research facility. And her short black hair stuck up at odd angles, like she had been running her hands through it while calculating something complex. "Thank you for seeing me," Tanaka said, her accent carrying traces of her childhood in the Tokyo arcology. "I've been following the Concordat situation, and I believe I have a solution to your tactical problem." Rodriguez gestured to the tactical displays, showing the overwhelming Krolek's advantage. Unless your solution involves building an entirely new fleet in 5 days. I'm not sure how you can help, he said. Not unkindly, but with the weariness of someone who had already exhausted every reasonable option. I don't need a new fleet, Tanaka replied, moving to the display controls and pulling up her own data. I need 1 ship in 12 days, which gives me 7 days after your deadline, but I think the Kroleks will give us that time once they see what we're offering. Okonkwo leaned forward, studying the schematics that Tanaka had displayed. And at first, she couldn't make sense of what she was seeing because the design looked like something from pre-spaceflight naval warfare. This is a railgun, Okonkwo said slowly, recognizing the magnetic coil configuration despite its massive scale. A ship-mounted railgun. The galaxy abandoned kinetic weapons 800 years ago, Tanaka explained, her fingers dancing across the display to show velocity calculations and penetration models. They moved entirely toward energy-based weapons because plasma and particle beams seem more sophisticated, more elegant, more powerful. And they are more powerful, Rodriguez interjected. Plasma cannons deliver more destructive force than any kinetic weapon could match, against shields designed to dissipate energy. Yes, Tanaka agreed, and her smile carried an edge that Okonkwo recognized from soldiers who had found an enemy's weakness. But I've analyzed every public record of Concordat shield technology I could access, and they're all optimized for one thing: dispersing heat and electromagnetic radiation. The implications hit Okonkwo like a physical blow, and she stood up to examine Tanaka's calculations more closely. They can't stop solid mass, Okonkwo breathed. And around the table, she saw understanding dawning on other faces. Not at the velocities I'm proposing, Tanaka confirmed, expanding her simulation to show a tungsten carbide projectile accelerating through a series of magnetic coils. My design can launch a 10-kilogram projectile at 4.7% the speed of light. And at that velocity, the kinetic energy alone is equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. Their shields won't even register it, Zhang said, leaning over the display with sudden intensity. Energy shields are designed to detect incoming plasma or particle beams and generate counteracting fields. But a solid projectile, traveling at relativistic speed, would pass right through like the shields aren't even there. Tanaka finished, and she pulled up footage of test firings at her research facility. Small-scale demonstrations that show projectiles punching through advanced shielding without slowing. I've been developing this for 3 years as a theoretical exercise in obsolete weapons technology, never imagining it would have practical application. Councillor Park was shaking her head, but Okonkwo could see she was fighting hope rather than rejecting the idea. This is one weapon, Park said. Even if it works in ship-scale combat, the Kroleks will have dozens of vessels. And you said you need 12 days to mount it on the destroyer Defiant and run full system integration tests, Tanaka confirmed. The weapon itself is already built. I have a working prototype at my facility that just needs to be scaled up and properly mounted. And the Defiant is in dock for refit anyway. Why the Defiant specifically? Okonkwo asked, though she felt her pulse quickening at the possibility, however slim, that this might actually work. She has the power generation capacity to handle the railgun's energy requirements, Tanaka explained. And her frame can be reinforced to handle the recoil, which at these velocities is substantial enough to tear apart a lighter vessel. Rodriguez was running calculations on his personal display, checking numbers against fleet compositions and tactical scenarios. Even if this works, one ship with one weapon can't defeat an entire Krolek's fleet, he said. But his tone had shifted from defeated to cautiously analytical. The recharge time alone, 47 seconds between shots, Tanaka admitted. But in space combat, that doesn't matter as much as you'd think, because every shot is essentially a guaranteed kill. Their armor can't handle kinetic impact at relativistic speeds any better than their shields can. Okonkwo felt the pieces clicking together in her mind. The tactical possibilities unfolding. We don't need to destroy their entire fleet, she said, moving to the tactical display and highlighting the Krolyk's command structure. We need to make them afraid. And nothing breeds fear like watching your most advanced warships torn apart by weapons that shouldn't work. This is an insane gamble, Park said. But Okonkwo noticed she was leaning forward now, engaged despite her reservations. We're betting everything on experimental technology. That's never been tested in actual combat. We're already betting everything, Jang countered. At least this way, we're betting on human innovation instead of alien mercy. Rodriguez looked around the table, reading the same desperate hope on every face that Okonkwo felt burning in her own chest. Dr. Tanaka, Rodriguez said formally, you have authorization to proceed with Project Thunderbolt, full priority resources. Whatever you need from military stockpiles and research facilities. I'll need the Defiance crew, Tanaka replied, already making notes on her tablet, and Commander Okonkwo if possible. Someone who understands both the tactical application and can command the vessel in combat. Okonkwo met Rodriguez's eyes and saw the question there. The weight of responsibility being offered. I'll do it, Okonkwo said. Because what else could she say when 2 million lives hung in the balance? When do we start? The Krolyk's fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler system like predators circling wounded prey. 27 warships ranging from swift corvettes to the massive dreadnought that served as War Prime Thalix's flagship, and their weapon systems powered up with the casual confidence of warriors who had never known defeat against inferior opponents. Commander Sarah Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the USS Defiant, her hands gripped behind her back to hide their trembling, and watched the tactical display populate with enemy contacts that outnumbered the hastily assembled human defense fleet by 3-1. All ships report ready status, Lieutenant Morrison announced from the communications station, his young voice steady despite the fear that Okonkwo knew every person on every human vessel must be feeling. Admiral Rodriguez confirms fleet deployment pattern Delta and wishes us good hunting. Okonkwo nodded, not trusting her voice for a moment, because the 8 other human destroyers and frigates positioned around Kepler Station were little more than targets meant to draw fire while the Defiant maneuvered for a clear shot. And every captain knew they were probably flying to their deaths. Dr. Yuki Tanaka emerged from the weapons bay, still wearing the grease-stained coveralls she had practically lived in for the past 12 days. And she moved to stand beside Okonkwo with the cautious movements of someone more comfortable in laboratories than combat situations. The Railgun is ready, Tanaka said quietly. All systems tested and triple-checked. And the targeting computer is synced with your navigation. But Commander, if this doesn't work, then we'll find out together, Okonkwo interrupted, because she couldn't afford doubt now. Not when 2 million civilians on Kepler Station were watching and praying that humanity's last desperate gamble would somehow succeed. The Krolyk's flagship broadcast on all frequencies, Thalix's translated voice booming across the void with the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. Attention human vessels, the War Prime declared. You have violated Krolyk's territorial claims and must withdraw immediately. Your presence here constitutes an act of war, and your primitive vessels cannot hope to survive combat against Concordat's standard military forces. Okonkwo moved to the communications station and opened the channel, a voice carrying to every ship in the system, human and Krolyk's alike. And she was surprised by how steady she sounded. This is Commander Sarah Okonkwo of the United Earth Space Service, she replied. Humanity declines your territorial claims and rejects your authority over our colony worlds. And if you want Kepler Station, you'll have to go through us. There was a pause. Perhaps 5 seconds of silence that felt like eternity. And then Thalex's response came through with what the translator rendered as amused contempt. "So be it," he said. "Let this be a lesson to species that forget their place." The Krolok's fleet surged forward, their formations precise and practiced. And Okonkwo watched the tactical display light up with weapons locks and targeting solutions as her tactical officer called out, "Threats. 27 enemy vessels accelerating to attack speed." Lieutenant Chen reported, her fingers dancing across her console. "Multiple plasma battery locks detected. Projected time to weapons range is 90 seconds. All ships execute evasive pattern Omega," Okonkwo ordered. And the human fleet scattered like frightened fish, trying to present difficult targets while drawing the Kroloks into engagement range. Bring us about to heading 270. That's speed." The Defiant's engines roared to full power, pushing Okonkwo back into her command chair as the destroyer accelerated. And through the view screen she saw the stars wheel past as they maneuvered into position. "Krolok's vessels entering weapons range in 30 seconds, Chan announced. Enemy targeting solutions confirmed on the Mercury and the Achilles. Okonkwo felt her stomach clench because those were 2 of their newest destroyers, crewed by people she had trained with and fought beside. But this was the plan. Draw the enemy in and give the Defiant time to line up a shot. The Kroloks opened fire, and the void lit up with streams of superheated plasma, purple-white bolts that crossed the distance in heartbeats. And Okonkwo watched a tactical display as the Mercury took a direct hit to her port shields. "Mercury reporting shield failure on port quarter," Morrison called out. "They're venting atmosphere from decks 4 through 7. Achilles is breaking formation," Chan added. "They've taken multiple hits and are attempting to withdraw." The Krolok's fleet pressed forward with ruthless efficiency, their superior weapons tearing into human shields that weren't designed to handle such punishment. And Okonkwo saw another ship, the frigate Thermopylae, take a devastating hit that left her tumbling with main power offline. "Commander, we have a firing solution," Tanaka said, her voice tight with tension as she monitored the Railgun status. "The flagship is in range, and the targeting computer has a 97% hit. Probability." Okonkwo looked at the tactical display one more time, seeing 3 of her ships already crippled and the rest taking damage. And she thought about all the calculations and simulations and desperate hopes that had led to this moment. "Fire!" She ordered. The Defiant shuddered as the Railgun discharged, every light on the bridge dimming as the weapon drew massive amounts of power from the ship's reactor. And through the view screen Okonkwo saw a brief flash as magnetic coils accelerated the tungsten carbide projectile to velocities that made relativistic calculations necessary. The projectile crossed the distance to the Krolok's flagship in 1.3 seconds, moving so fast that human eyes couldn't track it, and Thalex's vessel had no warning, no chance to evade or raise additional defenses. The energy shields that surrounded the massive dreadnought didn't even flicker, because they were designed to detect and counter plasma and particle beams. And the solid mass projectile simply wasn't something their systems could recognize as a threat. The tungsten carbide round hit the flagship's bow at 4.7% light speed, and the kinetic energy transfer was catastrophic beyond anything Okonkwo had imagined. The projectile punched through the forward armor like it was tissue paper, continued through bulkheads and decks and equipment, and exited through the stern in a spray of molten metal and flash-frozen atmosphere. And the energy of impact propagated through the massive vessel structure faster than any internal systems could compensate. The Krolok's flagship didn't explode in the traditional sense. Instead, it seemed to come apart like a building in an earthquake. HULL plates tearing free and internal compartments venting their contents as structural supports failed catastrophically. And within 10 seconds, the pride of the Krolix fleet was a rapidly expanding debris cloud every ship in the system. Human and Krolix alike seemed to freeze in that moment, and Okonkwo heard her own breathing loud in the sudden silence on the bridge. "What?" Lieutenant Morrison whispered, staring at the tactical display where the flagship's icon had simply vanished. "What just happened?" "We just rewrote the rules of space combat," Tanaka replied, her voice carrying equal parts triumph and disbelief. "Every military theorist in the galaxy is about to have a very bad day." The Krolix fleet hung in space for precious seconds, their formation disrupted by the impossible destruction of their command vessel. And Okonkwo could imagine the chaos on their bridges as commanders tried to understand what weapon could possibly bypass their shields so completely. "Second-in-command vessel is broadcasting on Krolix military frequencies," Morrison reported. "Translation Matrix is having trouble with the terminology, but I think they're calling for immediate withdrawal." "Negative," came a new voice over the communication channel, harsh and filled with what the translator rendered as outraged pride. "This is Battle Commander Krex assuming fleet command. All vessels maintain formation and concentrate fire on the human vessel that fired that weapon." Okonkwo watched as the Krolix fleet realigned, their weapons turning toward the Defiant with clear intent. And she felt a cold certainty that they were about to become the focus of firepower that could reduce her ship to atoms. "Railgun recharge status?" she asked, already knowing the answer. 31 seconds until ready to fire," Tanaka replied, monitoring the weapon systems as capacitors recharged and magnetic coil cycled. "They're going to get multiple volleys off before we can shoot again." "How?" "Evasive pattern Alpha 7, Okonkwo ordered. "All power to engines and shields. Give them a moving target." The Defiant twisted in space as a dozen Krolix vessels opened fire simultaneously, plasma bolts filling the void where the destroyer had been moments before. And Okonkwo felt her ship shudder as glancing hits scorched their shields. "Shield strength at 62%, Chun called out. Another hit like that and we're in trouble. The remaining human ships rallied, throwing themselves at the Krolix formation in desperate attempts to draw fire away from the Defiant. And Okonkwo saw the destroyer, Valiant, take a killing blow to her reactor that left the ship dark and drifting. 15 seconds to Railgun ready, Tanaka announced, her eyes locked on her displays. "Target priority?" "The cruiser on our port bow," Okonkwo replied, identifying Battle Commander Krex's vessel. "Let's teach them that pride is expensive." The footage reached the Concordat Council chambers within 6 hours of the battle, transmitted by the automated observation drones that monitored all territorial disputes. And Ambassador Jen Wei watched the recording play on the central holographic display while representatives from 12 civilizations sat in stunned silence. The image showed the Krolix flagship in all its imposing glory, shields shimmering with energy, weapons bristling from every surface. And then in the span of 2 seconds, the massive dreadnought simply disintegrated, torn apart by forces that made no sense to anyone watching. "Impossible," breathed the Vex delegate, its crystalline structure resonating with harmonics that the translator rendered as profound shock. No kinetic weapon should possess sufficient velocity to achieve such destructive capability. Chun stood at the human podium, and for the first time since arriving at the Concordat, she felt the eyes of every delegate actually focused on her, with something other than dismissive tolerance. "The weapon is a magnetic accelerator, commonly called a railgun," Chun explained, pulling up technical schematics that Dr. Tanaka had authorized her to share. Limited details that showed the basic principle without revealing the full specifications. "It accelerates solid projectiles to relativistic velocities using sequential magnetic fields. This is archaic technology," protested the Krolix interim representative. a battle commander named Vesh, who had assumed diplomatic duties after Thalix's death. Kinetic weapons were abandoned centuries ago as inefficient and primitive. Inefficient against targets with kinetic-resistant armor, perhaps, Chine agreed. And she couldn't quite keep the edge from her voice. But as your fleet discovered, highly efficient against shields designed exclusively for energy dissipation. The Concordat chamber erupted in a dozen different forms of agitated communication. Clicking and chiming and harmonic resonance and subsonic rumbles. And Chun waited for the chaos to settle while carefully maintaining an expression of diplomatic neutrality. The head counselor, an ancient being from the eldest species called Curator Ven, raised one crystalline appendage for silence. And gradually, the chamber quieted to hear its words. The implications of this development are... Curator Ven paused as if searching for adequate terminology, profoundly destabilizing to the existing military balance that has maintained Concordat peace for 2 millennia. With respect, Curator, Chun replied, choosing her words with care. The existing military balance maintained peace between Concordat members. It did nothing to protect humanity from territorial aggression by those same members. The Krollik's claim was legally founded under historical expansion precedents, Vesh interjected, though his voice lacked the confidence that Thalix had displayed. Your military response was disproportionate. 27 warships against 9 constitutes disproportionate force, Chun countered, and she pulled up casualty figures from the battle. Humanity lost 3 vessels and 472 crew, defending our legitimate colony, while the Krolliks lost 2 ships because they refused to withdraw after their flagship was destroyed. The Yulari representative, a flowing mass of bioluminescent tissue, pulsed with colors that indicated diplomatic concern. The human delegate makes valid points regarding defensive action, the Yulari said. However, the introduction of weapons technology that renders existing defensive systems obsolete creates dangerous precedent. What prevents humanity from using these weapons offensively against Concordat members? Chun had been expecting this question and had spent the past 6 hours preparing her response with careful consultation from Earth's government. Humanity proposes a new weapons treaty, Chun announced, and she transmitted the document that 3 different diplomatic teams had worked around the clock to draft. We will share Railgun technology with all Concordat members under strict conditions that include complete military transparency, binding non-aggression pacts, and restructuring of Concordat political representation to include species previously excluded from military councils. The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed this proposal, and Chun could see calculations happening behind alien eyes and sensor clusters as each civilization considered what this meant for their own position. You seek to leverage temporary military advantage into permanent political power, Curator Ven observed, and its tone carried neither approval nor condemnation. Merely statement of fact. We seek to prevent this situation from happening again, Chun corrected. Not just to humanity, but to any species that finds itself vulnerable because the Concordat's power structure favors ancient civilizations over newer members. The Krollik's representative Vesh stood, his chitinous plates rattling with barely suppressed anger. The Krollik's empire will never agree to share military technology with species that have proven hostile to our interests, he declared, and we certainly will not accept political restructuring that diminishes our traditional authority. Then, the Krollik's empire will face human fleets equipped with weapons your shields cannot stop, Chun replied, and she hated how easily the threat came to her lips. Our shipyards are already manufacturing Railgun-equipped vessels, and within 6 months we will have sufficient numbers to defend all our territories against any aggressor. This was a bluff. Humanity's industrial capacity couldn't possibly produce that many advanced weapon systems in 6 months. But the Krolliks didn't know that. And more importantly, neither did any other Concordat member. The Vex delegate chimed in with urgent harmonics. Other civilizations will research kinetic weapons independently, it sang. And Chun heard fear in the crystalline resonance. The technology is not complex by modern standards, merely overlooked. And if humanity refuses to share specifications, then every military power will develop their own versions, leading to an arms race that could shatter Concordat stability, added the Yulari, its bioluminescence flickering with agitation. We abandoned kinetic weapons through mutual agreement specifically to prevent such escalation. Curator Venn raised its appendage again. And this time silence fell immediately across the chamber. The human proposal merits serious consideration, the ancient being declared. We will recess for 3 standard days to allow all delegations to consult with their governments. And upon reconvening, we will vote on whether to accept humanity's terms or pursue alternative solutions. Chun knew that alternative solutions meant everything from economic sanctions to military action. And she felt the weight of Earth's future pressing down on her shoulders as the session ended and delegates began filing from the chamber. The Vex representative approached Chun's podium, its crystalline structure pulsing with cautious curiosity. Your species has achieved in months what the Concordat believed impossible, the Vex sang. You have fundamentally altered the balance of galactic power through simple application of overlooked principles. Sometimes the simple answer is the right one, Chun replied, echoing words that Dr. Tanaka had used in her technical briefings. The galaxy became so focused on advancing energy weapon technology that everyone forgot kinetic weapons could be advanced too. And now every throne sits less securely, the Vex observed. The Krolix will not easily forgive this humiliation, and other powers will resent being forced to accept new political arrangements. Then they shouldn't have created a system where military power determines political representation, Chun said. Humanity didn't ask for this fight. We just proved willing to finish it. Back on Mars Station, Archimedes. Commander Sarah Okonkwo stood in a medical bay watching doctors work on crew members injured during the battle. And she felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders in ways that no training had prepared her. 4DR Tanaka entered the bay, still wearing her grease-stained coveralls, and moved to stand beside Okonkwo in silence for a long moment. The Concordat is in chaos, Tanaka said finally. I've been monitoring communication intercepts, and every major civilization is scrambling to analyze our weapon and develop countermeasures or equivalents. Can they counter it? Okonkwo asked, though she suspected she knew the answer eventually, Tanaka admitted. Kinetic-resistant armor isn't difficult to engineer. It's just heavy and expensive, and no one's needed it for centuries. But it'll take years to retrofit existing fleets, and that's assuming they can afford the mass penalties. So we have a window, Okonkwo said, understanding the implications. Time to force concessions while we hold the advantage. And after that? Tanaka asked, when everyone has kinetic weapons and kinetic armor, what happens to the balance then? Okonkwo thought about the chaos of the battle. The ship she had lost, the crew members who wouldn't go home. And she wondered if they had solved humanity's immediate problem, only to create a larger crisis. We adapt, she said finally. Same as we always have, because if there's one thing humanity's good at, it's figuring out new ways to survive when everyone says we shouldn't. In shipyards across human space, construction teams were working triple shifts to mount railguns on every available vessel. And in research facilities, scientists were already exploring the next generation of kinetic weapons, because the galaxy had learned that humanity could innovate when threatened, and throne rooms and council chambers across dozens of civilizations over too. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler Station, the galaxy looked fundamentally different from the ordered civilization that had existed before. A simple tungsten carbide projectile traveling at relativistic speed had torn through a Krolix flagship and shattered 2,000 years of military doctrine ambassador. Chen Wei stood in the newly renovated Concordat Assembly Hall, its architecture redesigned to accommodate twice as many member species as before. And she watched as representatives from civilizations that had previously been excluded from political power took their seats. Alongside the old empires, the Krolyk's representative, no longer the aggressive war-primed Thalax, but a diplomat named Seeker, Rel, who spoke in measured tones about reconciliation and mutual understanding, approached Chun before the session began. The Empire wishes to formally acknowledge the wisdom of humanity's proposed restructuring, Rel said, his translator rendering the clicking speech with careful diplomatic neutrality. Our previous territorial claims were based on outdated assumptions about power dynamics. Chun nodded, accepting the statement for what it was, political necessity dressed as enlightenment, because the Krolyks had little choice when 17 human destroyers now patrolled the disputed territories, with railguns that could tear through any Krolyk's vessel that approached with hostile intent. The Concordat benefits when all voices are heard, Chun replied, using the diplomatic language that had become standard in the new order. Humanity looks forward to productive cooperation with the Krolyk's empire. What she didn't say was that 3 Krolyk's research facilities were now desperately working to develop kinetic-resistant armor, that the Empire's military budget had tripled as they scrambled to retrofit their fleet, and that their economy was straining under the pressure of maintaining status as a major power in a galaxy where the rules had changed. The Vex delegate floated past, its crystalline structure pulsing with what Chun had learned to recognize as cautious optimism. The technology sharing protocols are proceeding smoothly, the Vex sang. 17 civilizations have now successfully manufactured functional railgun systems based on human specifications. And how many have developed their own improvements? Chun asked, because she knew that sharing the basic technology was inevitable, and trying to maintain a monopoly would only create resentment. At least 8 that we know of, the Vex admitted. The Yulari have created a version that uses biological magnetic fields, quite elegant actually, and the Tresh have developed targeting systems that exceed even human accuracy. Chun smiled, because this was exactly what humanity had hoped for. A galaxy where innovation flourished, because everyone understood that standing still meant falling behind. And no civilization could afford to rest on ancient laurels anymore. The assembly session began with Curator Ven presiding, and the ancient being's first announcement sent ripples of surprise through the chamber. By unanimous vote of the Concordat Security Council, Ven declared, Admiral Sarah Okonkwo of the United Earth Space Service is appointed as Supreme Commander of Concordat Joint Defense Forces. Effective immediately. Chun felt pride surge through her chest, because she had worked behind the scenes to make this appointment happen. But she had never been certain the old powers would accept a human in such a prominent position. Admiral Okonkwo entered the chamber in full dress uniform, moving with the confident stride of someone who had commanded in actual combat, while most Concordat officers had only trained in simulations. And she took her position at the Military Council podium. The Joint Defense Fleet now consists of 400 vessels from 23 different civilizations, Okonkwo reported, all equipped with both kinetic and energy weapon systems, and all operating under unified tactical doctrine that emphasizes defensive cooperation. Some member states have expressed concern about human dominance in military affairs, interjected a delegate from one of the traditional powers. How do we ensure that this restructuring doesn't simply replace old hegemonies with new ones? Okonkwo met the delegate's gaze steadily. By remembering why this restructuring was necessary, she replied, Humanity didn't seek military dominance. We developed weapons to survive aggression. And we shared that technology because we want a galaxy where military power doesn't determine who gets exploited and who gets protected. In the audience section reserved for civilian observers, Dr. Yuki Tanaka sat watching the proceedings with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had fundamentally altered the course of history without seeking recognition. And beside her sat a young engineer named Hassan Kim, who was presenting the latest research on next-generation kinetic systems. "Your work changed everything," Kim whispered during a pause in the proceedings. "Every weapons researcher in the galaxy is now working on projects that would have been dismissed as obsolete 6 months ago. I just remembered something everyone forgot," Tanaka replied. "That sometimes the simplest solution is the right one. And that innovation comes from questioning assumptions rather than accepting established wisdom." The assembly moved through its agenda with surprising efficiency, approving trade agreements and settling territorial disputes that would have taken months to resolve under the old system. And Chun noted with satisfaction that species who had never held political power were now shaping galactic policy during a recess. The Ulari delegate approached Chun with pulsing bioluminescence that indicated serious concern. "There are troubling developments in the outer regions," the Ulari said, its colors shifting to deep purples and blues. "Species that were never part of the Concordat are now developing kinetic weapons, and without the treaty framework to constrain them." Chun felt a chill because this was the nightmare scenario she had discussed with Earth's Strategic Council, that the Railgun technology would spread beyond civilizations committed to peaceful cooperation. "How many species?" she asked. "At least 12 that we've confirmed," the Ulari replied. "And several of them have histories of territorial aggression. They're not developing these weapons for defense." Chun immediately requested a private meeting with Curator Ven and the senior security advisors. And within the hour, they were gathered in a secured conference chamber. The proliferation of kinetic weapons. Technology was inevitable, Curator Ven said. Human specifications were shared with 17 civilizations, each with their own security concerns and allies. And information flows despite best efforts at containment. "We need to extend the Concordat," Okonkwo said, studying tactical maps that showed the locations of emerging kinetic weapons programs. "Bring these outer species into the treaty framework before they decide to use their new capabilities aggressively. Many of these species have refused previous Concordat membership offers," pointed out a Krolix military advisor. "They prize independence over collective security. Then we make membership more attractive," Chun suggested. "Show them that cooperation provides better security than isolation, and make clear that aggression against Concordat members will be met with overwhelming force over the next 3 months." Chen led a diplomatic initiative that would have been impossible under the old Concordat structure, offering genuine partnership rather than condescending tolerance to species that had been marginalized. And the response surprised even optimistic projections. 8 of the 12 species accepted Concordat membership, bringing their kinetic weapons programs under treaty, monitoring in exchange for technology sharing and mutual defense commitments. And the 4 holdouts found themselves increasingly isolated as trade agreements and security pacts favored Concordat members in human shipyards. Production of Railgun-equipped vessels continued at impressive rates. But now those ships were just as likely to have mixed crews from multiple species. And human engineering teams were sharing construction techniques with alien counterparts. The UESS Defiant, now designated as the Concordat flagship, underwent a major refit that added Vex shield harmonics, Ulari biological sensors, and Tresh targeting systems to its already formidable human railgun. And Okonkwo commanded a vessel that represented the best technology a dozen civilizations could offer. Dan Naka received a Concordat Medal of Scientific Achievement in a ceremony that made her deeply uncomfortable. And her acceptance speech was characteristically brief. "We didn't invent something new," she said, standing before an audience of the galaxy's greatest scientific minds. "We just remembered something old and asked why everyone had stopped using it. And sometimes that's all innovation requires." the willingness to question why things are done a certain way and whether old solutions might work for new problems. The applause that followed was enthusiastic, but also slightly embarrassed, because every scientist present had been trained to seek cutting-edge solutions and sophisticated technologies, and none had thought to ask whether simple kinetic acceleration might be more effective than complex energy weapons in the Concordat archives. A Vex historian named Scholar Tan updated the official timeline with meticulous care, entering new data into records that stretch back thousands of years. Year 2347 of the post-unification calendar. Tan wrote, "The age of energy supremacy concludes following the Battle of Kepler Station. Human forces demonstrate